Mark Rogers TV talking ACC, and we're looking at the quarterback position. So what we're doing here is we're running down each position, each conference, top five, and we are starting now our ACC rundown with our distinguished panel. You got Dan Rubin of BC Interruption on your left. Right there in the middle is Jeff Greenberg of Sports Glutton. Also Ryan Kantor of Shaking the Southland. Gentlemen, we appreciate the time, and we'll start with Dan. Would love to hear your top five, Dan.
Well, I think I'm going to have a couple of common trends, as everyone else will have among a couple of these guys. But in top five, I went outside the box. I'll run from five upwards. I think Brad Kaaya, who's from the University of Miami, he's going to be a guy to watch this year. I only had him at fifth because if you think about his season last year, he was very good in terms of completion percentage and did throw for a ton of yards. But at the same time, he lost pretty much everybody from his weaponry from a year ago. So, it'd be interesting to see what happens in his sophomore year. I think if he slumps, Al Golden might be out of a job. So he's a guy that's still in my top five and is very good, especially because we'll see how he can handle the pressure. For my fourth quarterback, I went way off the board. I took Chad Voitek from the University of Pittsburgh. I got a chance to see him last year and really impressed me. He's a great game manager, which depending on the way that the offense is run is something that I know I look for. He does have the added benefit of having a great running game and a great weapon in Tyler Boyd, but he's a guy, if he's not going to lose you games, he might not go out and win them, but he's not the type of guy who loses them, which is something that I take into consideration when I'm considering the top echelon of type of quarterback. Top three type of guys that you're going to see, I think, on all of our lists. Everett Golson is my third quarterback from Florida State. I took a couple of points off because of the transfer from Notre Dame. He's going to have to learn a new system. Florida State reloads, so I'm not sure how much, if they win a whole truckload of games, is going to be on Golson, more so than the fact that they're just a really great team. So I put Golson at third. I'm going to take Justin Thomas as my number two quarterback out of Georgia Tech. Perfect triple option quarterback and still threw for 1,700 yards. A great decision maker, does a great job of reading defenses, and as a junior is going to be a guy to watch in the ACC. And my number one quarterback, I don't think it's going to surprise anybody, is Deshaun Watson from Clemson. True sophomore, possibly one of the best quarterbacks in the country, let alone the ACC. The only thing I kind of worry about with Watson is that he lost his offensive coordinator. May have a couple of problems on the offensive line, which I'm no stranger with Boston College. Sometimes that's easy to gloss over when you have a great quarterback. But he's the type of dual threat quarterback that could have Clemson competing for a national title.
All right, Dan, good stuff here with Brad Kaaya at 5, Chad Voitek at 4, Everett Golson 3, Justin Thomas at 2, and Deshaun Watson out of Clemson at number 1. All right, Jeff, what do you have to counter that?
Yeah, there are going to be a lot of similarities. I know my 4 and 5 are pretty close together. I've got Marquise Williams and Jacoby Brissett at 4 and 5, respectively, but there's not a lot of separation there. I think the consistent thing, and I didn't mean to use that word because that's exactly what I'm going to hit on with both of them, is how consistent they can be this year is going to separate whether they're that 4, 5, 6 spot or they move up in the upper echelon of this conference. I think with Brissett, he's going to have a strong running game behind him. What the big question mark is going to be his wide receiver core and whether there's a comfort level there. He's got a tight end that could help pick that up a little bit, but he lost both tackles too, and he was a guy that liked to scramble a lot, so the 2 new tackles on the line are going to have to come up big for him in order to keep Brissett healthy through the whole year, which would also help him be a little more consistent. But if he starts the year the way he closed last year, then he could have a big year for the Wolfpack. Same goes with Marquise in terms of health. Both of these guys are big, strong arms, but they like to run and they like to take hits. So with Marquise, it is going to be a factor with his health. What he's got working for him is every starter back on the offense that played meaningful minutes, meaning his whole line, actually the 2 deeps back, and the running backs are all healthy, and the receivers core is deep. So what he's going to have to focus on, I think what Coach Fedora really wants to see out of him, is just upping that consistency. He had led the offense to 6 different games with 40 points plus. That needs to go from 6 games to a little more in order to maintain that consistency. My third quarterback is the quarterback out of Miami, Kaaya, I would agree with Dan there that he's one to keep an eye on. Now, he did lose his supporting cast, particularly Duke Johnson, which can take a lot of pressure off a quarterback. But, he's a dynamic player. He really didn't seem to succumb a lot to the pressure as a true freshman. The big question mark there will be how he rebounds from the fact that Miami lost their last, I think, 3 or 4 games to close the season. It's not the note they wanted to go out on. I know he was trying to really get the team motivated and taking things a little more serious this spring. So for him, it's going to be how quickly I think his supporting cast helps his success. My second quarterback, it's a question mark because, again, we're talking about supporting cast, is Justin Thomas out of Georgia Tech. He had a phenomenal year last year, and I think, he doesn't have to throw the ball a lot. Running-wise, he was all over the place, which was great. But he lost 4 running backs that combined for 2,500 yards and 22 touchdowns. And when you're running that triple option and your first 4 running back options are all gone, there's going to be a little adjustment period, I think, in the beginning because he's not going to be able to do it by himself. And then there's replacing the receivers as well. Not only does he have to figure out who he's handing the ball off to, but who's going to be his go-to guy out on the outside. So he's a dynamic player, and from everything I saw last year, I don't think that'll end this year, but there's going to be some growing pains, I think, at the beginning. And then my top guy, probably like the rest of you guys, is Watson out of Clemson. Watching him just kind of burst onto the scene from game 1 last year when he finally got in the game, and he's the total package. He's got a rifle arm. He can move. And the difference between him and Marquise Williams and Brissett in terms of movement is he's not that big barreling quarterback runner like those two. I mean, he is athletic. Now, of course, he's coming off an ACL, so we'll see what that does from a running perspective. But these days, recovering from an ACL is a lot better than it used to be. I think Dan hit on something important, that they've got 3 offensive line spots to secure. Dabo has done a great job with recruiting, so I'm sure there's next guys ready to step up. But, I think Watson is getting all the accolades he deserves, which should be probably the preseason conference MVP. And, with some good games out of the gate, he should be in the Heisman race.
So based on those 2 lists, plus what I've got here, I think we're looking at the same 6 or 7 quarterbacks, depending on where we actually want to rate them. 3 of your 5 matched between Dan and Jeff. Okay, Ryan, what you got for the top 5 in the ACC?
Well, I'll be agreeable. I thought the last list was spot on. Honorable mention to Everett Golson. I think he has an opportunity to be very good with phenomenal teammates around him, but as Dan alluded to, obviously coming to a new team from transfer, we'll see. That kind of gives him a learning curve. But at number 5, I have Jacoby Brissett, a senior at NC State. He had 21 touchdowns and 9 picks last year, but he was dynamic. It's really a good word to use to describe him. And you saw it best in the Florida State game where he was scrambling, making throws on the run, and it seemed like he single-handedly kept him in that game. He's extremely talented, and for senior year, he could take a pretty average NC State team and make them a winning team. He brought him to a bowl game last year. Marquise Williams, I have number 4. He's a similar player, good runner, solid passer. He needs to be a little bit more careful as he had 9 interceptions last year, but he's my number 4 quarterback. Then number 3 is where really the more elite quarterbacks in the ACC. Start with Brad Kaaya at number 3. Only a freshman last year. He had 26 touchdowns, 12 picks, but he threw for 3,198 passing yards. And that was as a freshman. He stayed healthy the whole year, something that Deshaun Watson could not do. And one interesting thing, he lost Philip Dorsett, his key wide receiver, and Duke Johnson. So the question is, how much of his success was predicated on them versus how much can he carry a team without them? So that's really the only reason why he's not any higher. Number 2, I have Phil Steele's ACC number 1 quarterback in Justin Thomas, Jr. out of Georgia Tech. He only threw for 18 touchdowns and 6 picks, nothing too special. 1,719 passing yards, but he ran for 1,086. And something that you guys alluded to, we'll learn a lot about Paul Johnson's triple option offense. They lost pretty much all their running backs. They only brought back a very small handful. One of them already got kicked off the team in the offseason. And they lost Smelter at wide receiver. They pretty much lost all their skill position players. So we're really, really going to learn, is it about the quarterback and the offensive line, or how much do the skill position players really matter in that offense? So we'll learn a ton about that team and that program this year. And then at number 1, and this is obviously very much predicated on health, but Deshaun Watson. I think it's quite clear that he's the most talented player in the ACC, at least at quarterback. He's coming back from multiple injuries, most recently a torn ACL. And the one thing that gives me any hesitation about picking him at number 1 is the offensive line. Isaiah Battle, the left tackle, got kicked off the team, or will enter the supplemental draft just a week or so ago. And they also lost Kalon Davis, who was their best offensive lineman just the week prior, or during the offseason to the NFL draft. So, I mean, those are their 2 best offensive linemen now gone. That offensive line could be a problem, and if it is, what does that mean for Deshaun Watson's health? So that's the worry there. He only played a very small handful of games from start to finish. Of course, he shared time with Cole Stout at the beginning of the season. But if he could stay healthy and that line could keep him upright, he's the best quarterback in the ACC.
All right, guys, before I run down my 5 top quarterbacks in the ACC, 5 through 1, I'm going to make one distinguishing point, because you all brought up supporting cast. So you can do this 2 different ways. You can say, I'm looking at the offensive line, the running backs, the wide receiver, the coaching staff, how much support and guidance does this young man get at quarterback from the coaching staff. So you can take that into account. It sounds like all of you have and approach it that way, which is certainly reputable to do it that way. I do it in the fashion that, let's do the NFL analogy. If you take Tom Brady out of New England, and I consider Tom Brady to be the best quarterback in the NFL, and he goes and plays for the worst offense in the NFL, wherever that's going to be, the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm still going to consider Tom Brady to be the best quarterback in the NFL. He hasn't changed. Nothing about his talent, skill level, knowledge of the game has changed. He just now has a different supporting cast. It makes my job a little bit more difficult of analyzing the situation, because I'm stripping away all supporting cast, and I'm trying to make an objective opinion about how good these guys are simply as players. So I'm not trying to project who's going to have the best numbers, but who are truly the best quarterbacks. And with Justin Thomas, it's not necessarily the best passer, it's the best complete quarterback. So here is my 5 through 1. I start with the freshman from last season, Brad Kaaya. You all did a nice job of mentioning his skill set. He stands tall in the pocket, really slings it downfield at 58%. I think that percentage rate's going to go up, but again, we have to take into consideration he loves to go downfield. 26 touchdowns. He was thrown right into the fire based on a suspension that he earned the starting job in August. He had to go to Louisville and Nebraska the first couple games of the season, performed well, got much better down the stretch. Excuse me. At number 4, I go with Everett Golson. 22 turnovers last year, 14 picks, 8 fumbles that were recovered by the opponent. So that's something he has to shore up. He was a game manager that led his team to a national championship by not turning the ball over, and then 2 years later, with all those starts under his belt, he suddenly gets loose with the football. But still, 28 touchdowns throwing, 8 rushing, exceptional quarterback, now with an exceptional team. But of course, not taking that into consideration at number 4. Number 3, I go Justin Thomas. There are few, if any, 51% passers that are going to be rated in the top 5 of any conference, but he's a exception of exceptions, just like the Paul Johnson offense is the exception in the conference and in most conferences in college football. But he threw more touchdowns than any Paul Johnson quarterback in Georgia Tech, almost pulled off the ACC championship, pulled off the Orange Bowl win, ran for over 1,000 yards. He's my number 3 quarterback coming into his senior season. Then I really like the wild card here that I rank a little bit higher than most here is Marquise Williams out of North Carolina. He had to carry this offense. He had little running support. He was the top rusher on the team, both in yardage and in rushing touchdowns with 13, 63% passer, did throw 9 picks, but again, consider the North Carolina defense. He played in a hole most of these games, either he had to rush onto the field after a two-play 70-yard drive by the other offense, and he was in the hole at 7-0 out of the gate. So he was playing from behind, and most of the time knew that he had to put 40 points minimum on the board to have a chance to win the game. So Marquise Williams coming into his senior season at number 2. Number 1, Deshaun Watson of Clemson. The 3 injuries last season really marred what was otherwise a brilliant season. When you get 68% completion percentage out of a freshman, that's amazing. And to keep the interceptions at 2 versus 14 touchdowns, Ryan and I have talked about it several times, to compare the production of Clemson's offense with Cole Stout, a senior at quarterback, aside from what he did in the bowl game versus what Deshaun Watson showed us. It was truly remarkable, the performance by Deshaun Watson. So, guys, anyone else out there? We've pretty much stayed within the same 5 to 6 to 7 quarterbacks. Anybody else that might be off the radar right now that we may know a little bit more about coming this fall?
Yeah, I think one of the guys to watch is actually right in my backyard up here at Boston College with Darius Wade. Darius Wade is a guy that's stepping into a situation. For the 3rd straight year, Boston College has to renovate their offense. They're replacing all the pieces on the offensive line. They're replacing their top receiver. They didn't really have a receiver, I should say, from last year, but they're still in the process of replacing that passing game. And they're bringing in a guy who is going to bring a different dynamic to the offense with a little bit better passer rating than the guy who just left, Tyler Murphy. So Darius Wade, nobody probably has on their radar right now. I know I'm probably being a wicked homer when I get to talk about Darius Wade a little bit, but I have a feeling at some point this year he's going to show a flash, and if not, hey, we've got a backup with the last name of Flutie. You never know what's going to happen there, but I think he's going to be a guy to watch.
All right, gentlemen, before we sign off, anyone else you guys would like to throw out there?
I think he hit a good point when he mentioned backup. I think we're going to see a backup eventually this season that comes out and surprises people. With quarterbacks like Brissett and Williams and even Watson that like to run the ball, you see more injuries than you might. So I think somebody's going to come out of the shadows, and we're going to see someone we didn't expect step up.
Hopefully that doesn't have to be a Clemson.
Yeah, I think this team's going to contend for a national championship possibly. We'll stay within the ACC, contend for an ACC championship first and foremost if he can stay healthy and play double-digit games. All right, Ryan Kantor of Shaking the Southland. We've got Jeff Greenberg of Sports Glutton and also Dan Rubin of BC Interruption to help us out with the top 5 quarterbacks in the ACC. Gentlemen, thanks so much.
You got it.